The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Every day, citizens around the country are faced with new dilemmas. Dilemmas that affect them profoundly. Whether it's injustice, discrimination, falling through the cracks, scandal and cronyism, balances of power, ethics, religious freedoms, state versus citizens, and unfunded mandates, and the list goes on and on and on. Welcome to Speak Up. It's directed at those who have fallen through the cracks, and it gives them a voice. It's your turn to speak up. To stand up and fight back. Welcome to Speak Up. I'm Kevin Avard, your host, and today we're going to be talking about the pipeline again, and I've asked a state representative who hails all the way from the Swansea area to drive all the way to Nashville to talk about this proposed pipeline. And Representative Jim McConnell, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here, Kevin.
I appreciate you coming on.
My pleasure.
And I appreciate your service to the Capitol. Now, I noticed you got a little pin there that says no pipeline.
That's exactly right. I wear it all the time up there.
Yeah, fantastic. I was a little impressed with your with some of your background before we get into talking about the pipeline. We were talking in my office up at the Capitol, and you were a colonel?
I'm a colonel in the Army.
Colonel?
Retired colonel.
You're a retired colonel. How long were you in the service?
Well, I spent 30 years in the service, but 2 of them were on active duty. I was a lieutenant of the paratroops in the Central Highlands of Vietnam, and stayed in the reserves after that. I've been in the 82nd Airborne Division in every grade from second lieutenant to colonel except captain. My last assignment was to Budapest, where I was responsible for the line of communication in from Germany to the former Yugoslavia. I was assigned to the U.S. Embassy there and was responsible for our relations with the governments over there that whose territory we had to cross.
Well, maybe for another show we can talk about your opinions of what's going on in the national scene. You seem to have...
I would be happy to.
It's very disarming or alarming as to what's going on with ISIS or ISIL, however you want to call it, and the lack of approach or plan that we seem to have right now. But
we have no grand strategy,
and
we're looking like blundering fools, frankly.
So, long military service, and
graduate of the Army War College.
And War College, wow. And now, what got you into politics? How did you become a state rep?
Oh, I've been active in politics for a long time. Actually, when I was in college, I had an expense account to organize Republican clubs in New Jersey, Pennsylvania initially, and then in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, and Delaware. And then when I graduated, I went in the Army, came back out, and moved to New York City, registered as a conservative in Manhattan. There's so few registered conservatives in Manhattan that my name came up and somebody recognized it from college stuff. And decided that if I was the well-known troublemaker from college, they could definitely use me. So I became the secretary of the New York County Conservative Party. In 1976, I was drafted to run against Ed Koch for Congress on the east side of Manhattan.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah, I got a record vote, which turned out to be 5%, but that was a record for a conservative on the east side of Manhattan.
Well, I'm thinking, geez, you're a conservative in the bastion Republican area of Swansea. That's really not...
Well, there are 23 state representatives from Cheshire County.
Yeah.
4 of them are Republicans, 3 from Ringe, and me.
Wow.
I represent Swansea and Richmond.
Interesting. And you're not bashful.
No, I'm not the shy type.
Yeah, and I appreciate that about you, and you're very frank, and that's kind of why I wanted you on the show, because I'm trying to get more and more people to come in to talk about this proposed pipeline, which supposedly there's this energy crisis that New Hampshire has, and that's why that's the excuse that they're using to...
That's the argument they're offering.
Right.
It's an export pipeline.
Right.
There's no maybe about that. The Industrial Energy Consumers of America, back on February 9th of this year, attempted to intervene with the Department of Energy to block the export permits, which are a necessary part of this pipeline. On May 20th, the Department of Energy, ignoring their pleas, decided that they would issue them anyway. And the long and the short of it is there's plenty of money to be made shipping American natural gas overseas.
Which would compete with Russia and, correct?
Well, it would compete with any number of countries. As a matter of fact, the biggest field in the world is supposed to be the South Pars field, which is in Iran. And I have to believe that as we speak, the Chinese are over there starting to tap wells. There are two other significant discoveries recently, too, one off Egypt and one off Israel. And in any event, along the short of it, as you know, in any commodity, it's that extra barrel of natural gas, or if you want to call it a barrel of natural gas, or a bale of cotton, or bushel of corn, whatever it is, that determines the price for all the rest. In my civilian career, I was a member of the board of the New York Cotton Exchange and was a commodity trader, a pit trader. And I've got some experience in this stuff. And the long and the short of it is that price can change in a hurry. But if all those other sources of natural gas come on stream the way they might, perhaps that'll make it a little less profitable. But the problem with this particular pipeline is that the governors in the New England states have decided we need it, and they've got to fix it so the ratepayers pay for it. So my constituents are not only going to have to pay for it, and everybody in New Hampshire is going to have to pay for it. We're not only going to have to pay for it, but they're going to suffer immediate degradation of their environment because of all the blasting that's going to go on. There's a reason they call this the Granite State. And if you go out to Richmond, which is where it's going to come through in my district, you can see it firsthand. I mean, they're going to have to blast the daylights out of the place. Well, everybody out there uses a well. That's how they get their water, and blasting is going to affect that. The pipeline's going to be in the ground. If it does at some point spill, even if it doesn't explode, which is another story, but if it did spill and got into the aquifer, what's that going to do to the town?
Right.
Now, it isn't just Richmond. I mean, it's the whole southern portion of the
Ringe,
state.
Brookline.
Oh, yeah, the whole southwest corner of the state up to, right up to, the turn down into Dracut. The long and the short of it is we're going to suffer immediate environmental degradation. We're going to suffer the risk over time that in the event that there would be an explosion or something like that, or a spill, that we're going to suffer then. The fact is that we're not going to get a darn thing out of this.
Now, Massachusetts was successful at blocking the passage of this thing going through.
That's exactly right. This is 70 miles that was going in a straight line, west-east, to go to Dracut. And the long and the short of it is, every politician in Massachusetts, from the governor down to third assistant dog catcher, said not a chance.
Right.
Well, unfortunately, we don't have that kind of representation here in New Hampshire. I'm sure that Kinder Morgan has made it clear to any and all of our senior elected officials that, like the Marines, no better friend and no worse enemy. And the long and the short of it is they're throwing money around like it was, like mad crazy. And quite frankly, I'm very unimpressed with the senior leadership. Our two senators and our congresswoman out there haven't shown me much.
I know Representative Parison and I, we approached the governor and we had brought a number of questions from people throughout District 12. And, because people are alarmed. What's going to happen to my property? Is it going to lose its value? What's the resale value? What's going to happen to the equity in my property? And the insurance companies. Are they going to rate my property? Am I going to have to pay more for that?
Goes on and on.
Am I going to be compensated? And like you said, it goes on and on and on. And it's not as though it's just a bunch of so-called environmentalists just getting all out of hand. It's everybody. It's everybody from the far right all the way to the far left saying, look, this is my private property. And you are taking it so that you can benefit yourself. It's not going to benefit the whole state.
That's exactly right. As a matter of fact, they announced this December 8th. And December 8th, I had to submit a little newsletter portion that I submit every month to the Richmond Rooster. And I basically took a look at it from afar, not having seen any of the details, and said, well, I'm generally supportive of natural gas, but I'll be guided by whatever the community determines, and we'll do what I can to make sure that whatever their wishes are complied with. Well, a couple days later, I finally got a detailed look at it. Well, the next time I submitted something to the Rooster, I made it very clear that whether the community liked it or not, I didn't, and it was a truly bad idea and something that none of us should be supportive of. By the way, I took a lot of grief on that from the people who were, at that point, supportive of it.
It was brand new, and everybody's like, oh, we're going to get this new feed. It's going to lower our energy costs and the whole 9 yards.
Of course. They all thought it was going to be the pot of gold. They figured that it would come through. There are all sorts of improvements they'll make to the community. It's not going to be that bad, on and on and on. But the more you look at it, the more you find that none of that's the case.
Right.
So no matter how optimistic you may be about this thing, it'll disappoint.
And
By the way, when I talk about our senators and our our U.S. representative, I also don't want to let the governor off the hook. Most of all, the governor ought to be weighing in on this, and she is not. I showed up with this pin at a function last, I think it was January or February, and she gave me a dirty look.
well, I wanted to thank her for at least meeting with me and meeting with Representative Harrison, but you know, when you walk out of the room, you felt as though there was this sense of ambivalence. You know, oh yes, we'll do something, or we'll consider it. We'll look at these. I don't know if she's ever answered those questions, but what I got back was, well, we do have an energy crisis, and all this power will, you know, it's like the ocean, all tides, you know, float the ships. And I'm thinking to myself, well, you're going to be taking private property. We're not really going to be able to tap into this thing, into local, you know, distributors. So, and they're going to use basically eminent domain. In my opinion, eminent domain puts in a road so that everybody can drive on that road.
Right.
You don't just take somebody's property and then make profit for yourself. And that's really what's happening here.
Well, that's exactly what's happening here. But the other thing about it is Kinder Morgan hasn't been shy. I don't know if they said it lately, but early on in this process, they said, we're not a distribution company, we're a transmission company.
Yes, they've been saying
That's
that a
the way
lot.
it is.
Correct.
Case closed. So the bottom line is, if you're 100 yards from it doesn't really mean anything. You're not going to get any of the gas. You're going to have some sort of, we're going to have some sort of contract with a distribution company that'll then pipe it into your home, and those are pretty problematic. Now, they have tried to make a case.
That's going to be very high pressure, by the way.
Oh, yeah. Well, they, in fact, have reduced this thing to 30 inches, which is still massive, but they originally started out with 36 inches, which means 50% more gas than would have gone through a 30-inch pipeline, would have gone through the 36-inch pipeline. And as I recall, they were going to be talking about a 91,000 horsepower compressor, which would at that point have been the largest in any gas pipeline in the United States.
And the bottom line, too, for me, is this whole private property issue. You're taking people's property.
Oh, that's exactly right.
And in doing so, if they've been there 1 year or 50 years or 100 years, or it's been there since the foundation of our state, they're coming in and they're taking it. And if it's too close, or if it just cuts across a little bit of it, it's still going to affect you. And these people are going to make a ton of money off this gas.
Kinder Morgan is, absolutely.
And chicken scratch is going to be going to the people. I have a real problem with that.
Well, the other thing that's a problem is that the state is a quick-take state. In other words, if you are a condemner, if you're Kinder Morgan,
right,
and you come into this property and decide that you're going to take 5 acres of your 50 acres or whatever it might be, all they have to do is get an appraiser to come in and go to you with an offer. If you refuse the offer, then they can go to court and basically say that the offer's been refused. But at that point, as I recall, I think it's 60 days after they've gone to court, they can then go in and, judgment or not, begin to move their machinery onto your property.
And what average person has that kind of money to fight against a huge corporation like this?
Well, that's a large part of the problem here. The fact is that we as legislators, and I've got a bill in to address this, although it won't address the utility portion because that's a separate bill. Jim Belanger has a bill in, State Representative Jim Belanger has a bill in to take care of that. So we're going to work on that in a separate bill. But because I wanted to put one in, but
you put in 7 bills.
I put in 7 pipeline bills. I put in 15 LSRs, one of which, incidentally, would be a House resolution which would preclude people from out of state making contributions or out of the federal jurisdiction holding the election from contributing to a federal campaign. That would be a request for a House resolution to ask the U.S. Senate and U.S. House to consider a bill along those lines. So, if you are running for the Senate here in New Hampshire, as Governor Hassan and obviously Senator Aoumi running for re-election would be doing, they would, should this have become law or become law at some future date, they'd get all of their money from New Hampshire, period.
Now, a resolution doesn't really have much teeth to it.
No, but the fact is that this puts it out there. Mm-hmm. Prior to this, nobody had, as I understand it, thought of this. Campaign finance reform hadn't focused on, you don't live in the state, you can't make a contribution. Mm-hmm. Or you do live in the state, you're the only one who can make a contribution. And the long and the short of it is that's a different approach. And I would like to hope that I'll be able to get everybody from Mother Jones to the John Birch Society to decide that this is a good idea, support it, and ultimately get that passed in Washington as an amendment. Long and the short of it is I have to think that in the event that you're in a tight race as a challenger, for example, and your congressional or Senate opponent has been there a while and has amassed umpteen $1 million in their war chest, and of course you're running around trying to get $20 from your constituents so you can add it up and buy a few yard signs. The fact is that when you show up as a congressman or a senator, the lobbyists are all over you. And the truth is, this bill would fix it so that they could show up and talk to you, but they'd have to leave their checkbooks at home.
Yeah.
And of course, the money that all those senators and congressmen get in campaign contributions along those lines are because of the fact that they're good team players. They play ball.
Have you had any correspondence with Senator Avard or Senator Shaheen, or have they responded to you?
I've talked to their people. I have not talked to them, but I will be doing that because I'm going to make a point of doing that. And the fact is that they have had ample opportunities to take care of this.
We're going to have, hopefully, some more people to come on the show to talk about how it affects them directly. Maybe we'll have some experts on as well. But you're hearing some stories from people whose properties are just going to be completely taken. Is that correct?
I don't know if they're going to be completely taken, but the problem is that if you have a pipeline that's 15 feet from your front door, first of all, who's going to buy your house? And second, do you really want to continue to live there?
Right.
I mean, if there is an explosion, you're going to be incinerated. Now, we have one man out there who wrote a letter to the editor at the Keene Sentinel, which they ran, which basically said, congratulations, they've figured out a way to make a 60-year-old man who owns his home homeless. And in fact, that is going to be the case. We have pipeline. The pipeline is proposed to go through, I forget which town it is, but right outside their elementary school. And of course, that makes everybody extremely nervous.
And how are the landowners being compensated as far as the 60-year-old?
Case by case. There will be an appraisal, and as I understand it, they will then offer that to the landowner. But as I say, it's quick take here in the state. And you have to, they're going to take your property, and by the time you get a court judgment, if you have a problem with that, it's probably going to be too late. You've lost your leverage.
You had mentioned something about how that, there'll be a first refusal or going to the court.
Well, they just submit it to the court.
And how do you think the courts are going to handle this?
Well, ultimately, if you're going to make an issue of it, fine. But the problem is that by that time, the pipeline's going to be in, and you'll have lost your leverage. Let's say they take 10 acres of your 100 acres, but you have an organic farm. And let's say that there's some runoff or something.
When you say runoff, are we talking gas runoff?
No, but runoff from whatever activity has to be promoted up there. I mean, they're going to basically strip the land. They're not going to allow any sort of shrubbery to go up there. There would be runoff from the construction, certainly. Hopefully there's nothing else, but the truth is that many of these pipelines have emissions that seep out one way or another. They've got compressor stations, which
an
certainly have a lot of
allowable
that.
amount.
Yeah, and the fact is that if you've got an organic product or if you're raising llamas or something like that, it may be a problem. The point is that when they come in and say your 100 acres or your 10 acres is worth $100,000, well, we don't know what the effect of that would be on your other 90. And that may be something that you need to negotiate with them, and maybe could, but the fact is that the condemner is going to come in and say it's worth $100,000 or $10,000, whatever it's going to be. That's the price we're offering. Take it or leave it. If you choose to leave it, they'll go to court, file with the court, and start, 60 days later, they'll move their bulldozers in there and start building. And you're out of luck.
That gets me, instantly angry, like you want to pop.
Well, not every state is a quick take state.
But if I'm a landowner and they're telling me that, or I'm faced with this type of a decision,
Well, that's the nature of eminent domain.
It's but the problem with that being the nature of eminent domain is really supposed to be there so that everybody can use it.
It's supposed to be for the public benefit.
And this really isn't benefiting
That's
the public.
right. If you put in
it's benefiting mass.
You put in the way the pipelines began to do all this was in the Second World War. That was really the highlight of their, that's their first move east like this. And that was because the Germans were shooting up the tankers that were coming up the East Coast. So they decided they had to put some priority behind building pipelines and did. Okay, but the Second World War's been over for a while. The long and the short of it is, we don't have that kind of condition anymore. Fact is here that this is going to benefit Kinder Morgan and nobody else. That's wrong.
And again, the overseas issues, a lot of this is going to be exported.
Absolutely. They were talking, as I say, about a 36-inch pipeline, a massive pipeline. And it was all going to be exported. It's going up to the Maritimes. As I say, the Department of Energy has already approved the export permits. That's what this is all funded on. But from Kinder Morgan's point of view, it's an absolute no-brainer. We're going to pay for it. They're going to make a fortune.
They're going to take our property, and then we're going to sell it overseas.
They're making out like bandits. Richard Kinder contributed $1 million to Jeb Bush's campaign, as did his wife. And I'm sure that's going on all over the place.
I didn't know that.
They did.
Interesting. So what can the average person do?
Well, it's very difficult. The long and the short of it is we have to apply as much pressure as we can to our federal representatives and to the governor. And thus far, we have not been able to do that. They remain unimpressed. As I say, they've had, a week shy at this point, as of this taping, a year to decide whether or not they like the looks of this pipeline and what the problems with it were, if from their standpoint they could see any. I think they're there like neon signs, but the long and the short of it is they have an obligation to either say they're in favor of it or say they're against it or tell us why they're in favor of it. But quite frankly, there's a saying in the armed forces, the further up you go, the more eunuchs you meet. That shouldn't be the case with our elected representatives. I mean, Senator Ayotte is running for re-election. She'll have to answer this question. If she doesn't answer it from anybody else, she's answering it from me.
Interesting.
And Governor Hassan's going to have to answer this question, too.
As soon as you take a left, and you're heading out, when I say left, if you're heading out west anywhere throughout all District 12 and in surrounding districts, you see no pipeline, no pipeline, no pipeline, no pipeline. All these people are speaking up. But are you seeing this on the news other than the Sentinel?
Well, the Keene Sentinel's been pretty good about it.
But do they have statewide?
No, of course not.
And that's what I'm saying. Is it isolated to just this section of the state, and they're the only ones concerned?
Kinder Morgan is spending money up here, like throwing money around like it was cotton candy. I mean, the bottom line here is that if you've got a radio program, they advertise on it. If you have a newspaper, they'll take advertising in it. If you're running for office, they'll make promises to you. I mean, long and the short of it is bought and paid for.
I've been to a number of the meetings, whether Milford, out in Ringe, a number of them. And I don't see a whole lot of crowds of people out there supporting this. I hear just the opposite.
Right. They're supporters of the people who are on their payroll. That's been my experience. And that's shameful. Bottom line here is our elected officials are supposed to be representing our people. And, I'd be prepared to stand up and say it's a good idea if it were, but it isn't.
Right. And that's been my issue. I don't have a problem with natural gas. I do think it's one of the cleaner energies. However, the private property issue just is driving me nuts.
The private property issue, the environmental damage that it's going to cause needlessly. I mean, this is being moved from Massachusetts, where it goes right in a straight line, up here, where it's going to be more environmentally difficult to put it in, do a lot more damage.
And Mass successfully resisted. Why aren't we doing the same? If the end goal is the same.
Well, you'll have to ask the governor and our senators and our congresswoman on that one. I mean, the bottom line is I don't see any signs of life there. They're all dead from the neck up, if you can believe the most charitable interpretation. And less charitable interpretation is they've got their eye on contributions. Which
Are there any other organizations out there where people can say, look, I've been hearing about this. I want to do a little more research. Do you recommend anybody to
Well, I
get in
work
contact with?
closely with the New Hampshire Pipeline Awareness Network. I don't know that they really have an outreach program. On December 11th, we're going to be organizing a rally in Concord, where we're going to be presenting a 10,000 signature petition to the governor, and certainly do that. Now, New Hampshire Pipeline Awareness has a website which you can look up on the net, and I think.
Is there going to be could you imagine 10,000 people going to the Capitol?
Well, I've encouraged a lot of the coalition of the towns met with me the other day, the towns that are affected, and they've asked how they can help. And I've encouraged them to make sure that when the bills are scheduled, and I'm going to make sure they know when they're scheduled, that they have as many people show up as possible. Quite frankly, I'd be thrilled if we could tie up traffic and fix it so we really had a mess up there on the occasions that these things are being held, because these hearings are being held, because the fact is this really, really does affect those towns out there. And in the event that they did get a spill and hit the aquifer, that would pretty much be the end of the town.
Interesting. There's a lot of private property issues going on. I know that there's some other land acquisitions that are happening out towards your area as well.
Well, that's exactly right. The Silvio Conti Wildlife Refuge, basically, I'm not sure I even got the title on that right, but I think I do.
Yeah.
But essentially, if you look at their ultimate plan, and again, we're talking eminent domain. Fish and Wildlife has eminent domain power, and they try not to use it, they say, but the bottom line is they can. And ultimately, they intend to take the entire Connecticut River watershed, which, if you look at it, is simply astonishing.
I know there's a few people are going to lose their entire property, and that a whole town might actually be lost as a direct result of that.
Right.
Who gives these people this authority? People that have been living there for years. I understand that there was one gentleman who's actually become landlocked because he refused to sell or refused to give in, and so they cut off all access to his property.
I wouldn't doubt it.
And we've heard about these stories way yonder in past history, and people resisting and how this happens, but it's still happening today.
What's happening right here in New England?
Right.
And it's a lot of people would suggest that, well, this is a Western problem. No, afraid not. If you look at the Connecticut River watershed, that really is going to be a problem.
You did file some legislation for that as well?
I did.
I mirrored that before.
Yes, I filed one bill that would impose a moratorium on that
Correct.
until we have an assessment of exactly how much they've taken. We have a law here in New Hampshire, and I forget the exact number on it, but says that they can't take more than 2% of the state's land
Correct.
area.
I thought that was a federal law.
Excepting the White River forest, or pardon me, the White Mountain forest. But the 2%, once calculated, I suspect we may already have exceeded. But in any event, that should put a stop to this if we're going to go by our law, which we should, and we should insist on that. In addition to that 2%, which applies to the entire land area of the state, excepting the White Mountain area, as I say, they also have a provision in there that says that, and I forget exactly what the details are, but in each affected town, it can't take more than a certain percentage of the tax base.
And you're going to have a whole town lifted up, from what I understand.
Well, in a couple cases, it's beginning to look that way. Yeah. And of course, we ought to be able to apply these laws. They're on the books.
Exactly.
And the bottom line is we ought to make sure they stick.
I got 22 seconds. How can people get in touch with you if they want to find more out about you?
My email address is mcc@mindspring.com. My cell phone number is 903-3878. And I'm always up at the Capitol. I'm there every time we have a session.
Hey, thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure,
Appreciate
Kevin.
it.
Great to see you.
And thanks for watching Speak Up. And we hope that if you're going to be affected by this pipeline, that you drop us a note at speakupnh@gmail.com, and we'll have you on the show to talk about you and tell your story. Until next week, thanks for watching. Thank you for watching Speak Up. And we want to thank our sponsor, Avard Cleaning. If you have a carpet job, call Avard. They're the best in town. And if you have a story and you want to be heard, contact me, Kevin Avard, at speakupnh@gmail.com. That's speakupnh@gmail.com. We'll get your voice heard. Thanks for watching. Until next week.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.